Okay, folks, welcome to Rippaverse and the Stunning Secret of Comicsgate. I'm Mike Partika. I've been reading comics for about, oh god, over 40 years now. And I'm not used to crowd-funded comics, though. I've always bought the stuff straight off the rack. I don't buy too much anymore. I'm usually going back for reprints of some of the older stuff that I grew up with. Marvel's Epic collections are awesome for that. But every once in a while, something makes me stand up and take notice, and that thing has definitely got to be the Rippaverse in this case, because look at the total on the Rippaverse campaign. Out of an original $100,000 campaign goal, this thing has brought in 3.25 million. I went and I checked it. This is actually a screen cap from a few days ago. It's up to 3.3 million now. So, wow, this is the most successful crowdfunding campaign in crowdfunded comics history. And you kind of got to wonder, what is it that this Rippaverse is drawing in all these readers with? What is the secret behind not only this, but all the other titles that are associated with Comicsgate? Now, Rippaverse is not an officially Comicsgate. I don't know exactly what you have to do, learn the secret handshake, swear allegiance, go through the ritual, something like that, but he has appeared on Comicsgate programming, and he has been sharing out links to Comicsgate related titles. Comicsgate, by the way, is a movement within crowdfunded comics to basically try and return to comic book storytelling the way that it was done before comics got just way too political. When all these left wing politics started infiltrating comics, especially the big two and all of their attempts to push liberal values on the public. If you want to see a good sampling of that, check out my video, The Creeping Rainbow in Comics, number one, The Social Justice League. So, Comicsgate is basically a reactionary movement. And in this particular case, the person who is spearheading this particular campaign, which again is not officially related to Comicsgate, but is partnership with it in terms of their mutual support, is Eric July. Eric July has been commenting for about the last 4 years now on comics and uh, pop culture fandom, how DC and Marvel have been treating their movie properties and their comic book properties, and you can see that he's got a substantial following. He's got 491,000 subscribers on YouTube. And you might think that, well, that just answers the question right there. How did he manage to get $3.2 million in revenue for his comic book campaign? Well, I mean, look at his YouTube subscriber base. He's got almost 500,000 subscribers. This amounts to about 7% of what his YouTube subscriber base is. That should be it, right? Yeah, the thing is I think Keanu Reeves has a lot more fans than Eric July does. I mean, Keanu Reeves is one of the hottest movie stars out there, and his comic book campaign, Berserker, only managed to net about $1.4 million, 1.4, 1.5, and had 14,571 backers. So, as a strict percentage thing, I don't think that's what's coming across here. So I want to try and find out what, just beyond Eric July's own star power, just beyond his own subscriber base, does he have in this Rippaverse? What is he putting into this Rippaverse that is attracting so many people to plunk down money and buy a comic? So let's go to one of the descriptions on his campaign. It says, "The Rippaverse is finally here, and ISOM number one is the perfect comic book to launch it." Written by the founder of Rippaverse Publishing, Eric July, this book not only serves as the beginning of a new character, but also as a launching pad for what will inevitably be an ever expanding comic book universe. And let's take a look at that last word there, comic book universe, because in the comic books there are a ton of titles that are just standalone right now, and sometimes things like The Walking Dead. You've got titles like Something is Killing the Children. You've got titles like what was it, another critically acclaimed one, Letter 44. You have a lot of titles that are like their own self-contained titles, but a universe of titles is where you have a lot of properties that all share the same universe. They all share the same interlocking series of stories so that they cross over very readily with one another. Now, of course, you've probably experienced some of these at the theaters because you have either seen the DC extended universe movies where you have Superman, Batman, The Flash, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. You've seen all these characters, Justice League. That's one of the main. This is really the first major comic book company with its universe of characters is the DC universe. There's also, of course, the Marvel universe, which has properties like Spider-Man, the X-Men, Captain America, Fantastic Four, and various others who have all come together to form the Avengers. So you've got those two are the major. They're called the big two as far as the comic book industry is concerned because with DC Comics starting in the 1930s and with Marvel Comics starting in the 1960s, these have been the ones that have had the most staying power as comic book universes with large casts of characters who often cross over and interrelate. That's not to say that other companies have not tried to do shared universe type of things. Image Comics was originally conceived of as a shared universe in which all of the original Image creators' content would interrelate. But that kind of fell by the wayside, and Image has since moved on to be more of a clearinghouse for more independent books, such as The Walking Dead, which I mentioned before. So then you've got other companies like Dark Horse Comics, who for a long time was like the number three in the industry, and they came out with their own Comics Greatest World, a riff on Stan Lee's World's Greatest Comics magazine that he used for Fantastic Four. And Comics Greatest World had about 16 different properties that they featured in a shared universe, the longest lived of which was Ghost, which after the universe itself kind of collapsed in and the titles fell away, Ghost lasted for about, I want to say, a good close to 5 years. Then you had Malibu Comics, and they have their Ultraverse. That was their own shared superhero universe with writers and artists who had become prominent in the mainstream titles. You had people like Norm Brayfogle and Gerard Jones, and this fell apart after a few years, and Marvel bought out the properties and since haven't done really much of anything with them. You've also had some interesting variations on the theme. The Triumphant universe was one of my personal favorites because it was a sci-fi universe completely self-contained and away from Earth in any way, shape, or form. And they had a couple of gimmicks going for them too. One was the fact that they would tell you what their print runs are and where your comic book fell in the print run. And not only that, but if you look kind of up towards this uh, the issue numbering box, there's a GCY and then a number. All of their comics were actually numbered in sequence according to the calendar date on which the events in there occurred, so that if you wanted to, and I've done this before, you can actually read all of their comics in chronological order. Fascinating concept, but unfortunately, this line of comics fell apart after about a year. Jim Shooter has the auspicious designation of having actually put out four different comic book universes, starting with the Marvel imprint, The New Universe. That lasted for about 3 years. Then going on to the first iteration of Valiant Comics. And then after he was ousted from Valiant Comics, he went on to go and create the short-lived Defiant universe, which it was unfortunately short-lived because they decided to release a couple of the comics as trading card sets. And that was just kind of a marketing gimmick from the fact that they were largely sponsored by a trading card company. And yeah, unfortunately, they managed to fall apart before their first major crossover. And then there was the even more short lived Broadway Comics, which was, I believe, created as a subsidiary of the same company that does Saturday Night Live. And this one had it had one excellent title, Nights on Broadway, and I'm very envious of whoever it is managed to get a signed copy of Nights on Broadway number one, because that really was the best title of the batch. But they had about four or five comics tops that they had some other properties in the works, but it fell apart in about a year. So, oh, and looking at Valiant, by the way, Valiant is really the only one that survived to this day. However, it has gone through a couple of iterations. After about 6 or so years in its first incarnation, and having gone through some growing pains and artist change ups and style change ups, Their company finally fell apart. It was rebooted briefly as a just taking the original properties and really changing them up. You had the original Conan in a can, or Conan the Barbarian in a can idea for Exo Man of War, and then instead wound up being a hapless scientist inside an alien bodysuit. And then the latest version of Valiant Comics, which has remained stable for about, I want to say about 10 years now. I think I'm right about that. They've actually managed to remain stable using the original properties largely as they were originally conceived. The only thing about Valiant, though, is that they don't have any more than 3 or 4 titles per month. So even though they have a very large stable of characters for their universe, they don't have a lot of titles that showcase them. And they do about 3 or 4 series that will last about 4 issues, and then they'll reboot their titles or they'll come out with some other miniseries. So DC and Marvel are like the only large scale comic book universes that exist out there. And if Eric July is threatening to put up a new universe, then I would say that under the reasons to support the Rippaverse, it's a new universe of characters would be a very, very prominent reason among those reasons. Now, what other reasons could all of these people possibly have to support Rippaverse? Well, to go for that, let's look at the Rippaverse Ethic, which is a document that was put out by Eric July on his Rippaverse website, talking about various things that they promise to do. And one of them has to do with the subsection Canon and Continuity. Every single book you buy will always matter. If retcons are to exist, they'll only be used in the classic sense of introducing new information. We want every book you buy to always matter. These stories happened. There will be no lazy time travel to change histories or events. There will be no cheap multiverses that have altered versions of the same character. If you own a book, you own a part of history, and it's our mission to keep it this way. Now, this is an obvious dig at DC Comics, which in 1985 famously published Crisis on Infinite Earths, which took a large swath of their property and condensed it all down into one Earth. They previously had a multiverse, now they had a universe, and they wound up doing a lot of retconning and taking stories apart and even rebooting characters altogether, Superman and Wonder Woman especially, so that the previous stories that they had published in the last 50 years no longer counted, no longer counted as as canonical, as in continuity. And so people like me at the time, I took that as an opportunity to just let a lot of my comics go because they no longer fit into the new scheme of things. There was a new universe, and that was the canonical universe, and that's all that mattered. And what's really crazy is that they actually tried this again just recently by doing the New 52 reboot, in which I think they had 52 titles come out, and in this New 52, it happened again. Basically, there was a Flashpoint miniseries in which there were 3 universes, which had to do with Wildstorm and the more horror centric Vertigo titles under DC's Vertigo imprint, and then there was the DC Comics Universe mainstay, and all 3 of those got blended together into what was called the New 52, in which most of the characters got reset to being, oh, just about 5 years past their origin stories, and so you had a much more younger and more diverse and more energetic and less familiar with the business kind of superheroing. And people largely complained about this until DC made steps to undo most of this by their special DC Comics Rebirth and then Jeff Johns' Doomsday Clock. So this was kind of a push to reset the stage again, and basically what Eric July is saying, that we're not going to do this kind of crap. We're not going to pull this kind of crap on you, where we make these major events that take all of the history that you have learned so far and throw it out the window as if it didn't matter. We're not going to do that to you. So that's another nice guarantee. The other thing that the Rippaverse ethic contains is a promise of a comprehensive timeline. We promise to try to keep reboots to a minimum. If this means that a series is on its 100th issue or volume, so be it. And this is an obvious dig at Marvel, who in the last 8 years have had not one, not two, not three, but four number one issues for The Amazing Spider Man. And sometimes it isn't even the creative team that's changed, it's just been. Some event happened and they decided to renumber starting from number one again. And so this is like four number one issues in the last 8 years. That's like a new number one every 2 years. It's kind of ridiculous. So this is what we've got in Marvel, and he's promising never to do that. And then, of course, there's always the standard story of great story and art, or this great the standard promise of great story and art. So let's just go with that. So, are these things enough? Are these things enough? Are those promises enough to generate the $3.2 million and nearly 38,000 total purchasers for this comic book universe? I'm going to argue no. And the reason I'm going to argue that is, well, let's first look at these three particular items. New universe of characters, no retconning, no time travel to get rid of prior continuity, and no reboots where you have multiple number one issues and it's hard to keep track of where you are in the series. Now, all of this would make sense if you were dealing with a comic book company that planned on putting out a large number of properties and a large number of issues. But in a recent tweet from a fan, a Comicsgate fan, asking Ethan Van Sciver, who is like the godfather of Comicsgate, how many releases each year does a crowdfunded creator produce? And talking about Shane Davis, who's coming out with a property now, says he's producing one large book this particular year. And Ethan Van Sciver replies, as many as possible, but one per year is okay to start. One per year is okay to start. Now, I have heard in a succeeding video from Ethan Van Sciver, who's got a YouTube channel, uh, that Eric July is planning on putting out maybe 3 to 4 titles per year. But even that doesn't really build a new universe of characters very quickly. You quickly run out. Well, you're not running out of properties, but you are running out of time within the space of a year where you have a chance to grab all these readers' attention. It's like if you put out ISOM number one in January, and then in March or April you're putting out something else number one, and then 3 months more down the line you're putting out something else number one, or maybe it's ISOM number two at that point. You're not really building up a universe. You're building up maybe what, 2 or 3 characters. Is that it? Is that all you're going to get? I mean, you might have some titles that are team books, so that you have, you know, multiple characters within a particular book. But generally speaking, that's not really building a whole universe right off the bat. That's like taking years, maybe even a decade or so, before you've actually got what you can safely call a universe to your credit. So I don't even know if this promise doesn't fall through just on that basis. Same thing goes with no history altering, retconning, time travel, or multiverse crap. Well, no kidding. You're only putting out 4 books a year. And when are you going to have time to do any kind of retconning? How is it that you're going to have a time travel theme that screws up your continuity? You don't have any continuity. You're not going to have anything even remotely resembling continuity for the next, what, 2 or 3 years? So, this promise of no history altering, you're going to spend 2 or 3 years just building up any history to alter. And the same thing goes for no reboots generating multiple number one issues. I mean, my God, if you're only going to do 1 or 2 issues of ISOM per year, well, of course you're not going to go back to number one. What would be the point? You're not. It's just all of these promises that Eric July is putting out to support the Rippaverse. They all fall through when you realize just how little content he's planning on producing. So, what about great story and art? Because really, that's all that's left. Okay, well, let's look at the story. Avery Silman was once an entry-level hero known as Isom in the city of Florespark, Texas. Shortly after gaining his special abilities, a certain event had him hang up his suit, and now he stays on the outskirts of the city living as a rancher. Okay, so we're starting off with the retired hero. Avery's sister gives him a call and wants him to visit an old friend by the name of Darren Fontano. Another family friend that was interning with Altona, his sister, has gone missing, and she last heard that she was dealing with Darren. But Darren has much changed since he was hanging out with Avery when they were young. So this is the hero who's gone off and retired, and in the meantime, in the city where things have been growing and changing and stuff, one of his old friends has now been morphing into what could be a new enemy. And then the visit turns into the longest days, one of the longest days in Avery's life. Uh, he has the luxury of running into some of these X-Seps. The Alpha Core and Yaira have their own set of conflicts. So there's these other heroes and villains and such that he once was previously involved in, and now he's being drawn back in to their drama. This is not exactly hugely creative stuff. I mean, it's a standard returning hero story. It's like Walking Tall with The Rock or whoever it was who played in the original version of that. It's basically the person who left town and basically said, "I'm not doing this anymore," and then comes back because of some personal commitment and gets drawn into all this drama. It's something that you've heard a lot about. It's kind of on the level of John Wick. It's kind of on the level of I can't find a really great analogy for it, but this is not exactly, you know, bowling me over with originality. It's basically a returning hero story. So, as far as the story goes, it depends on whether it's well written or not, of course. If this is a well written story in that vein, then yeah, that could obviously push it over the top. But we don't have any evidence that it's well written because we don't have any evidence of writing. We just have, as far as the art is concerned, the art, which is decent art. I think the art is pretty good, although I wind up having questions about this particular panel on the left because you've got like three guys rushing him from behind. He's flipping one over his back, and for two more panels, these three guys don't really try to do anything to him, and then somehow they're all in front of him. Is that what's going on in the last panel? That either that or he hopped over the guy and turned around and I don't know. There's some problems with placement here, but it's very dynamic artwork, and depending on how the writing goes, it could go pretty well. But I have to say that as far as like character design, you're looking at some pretty tepid character designs here. I'm not seeing anything that's particularly eye popping about any of the costumes here. And my gosh, look at the monochrome that's going into the Alpha Core. I presume that's the Alpha Core there. Their costume style. I mean, not only are they so green. I mean, even her weaponry is green. She's got these green whips going. So this is a little bit on the bland side. I'm a little bit disappointed in just the character design coloring here. Now there is another character, Yaira, and her outfit is decidedly snazzy, but at the same time, one of the things that's kind of noticeable about it is that you don't have any like defining chest symbols or something, which is kind of a standard in comics these days, even still. Nothing to really say, who these people are and how that relates to their costumes. I mean, the color scheme on this one is nice, but it's such soft colors that you just kind of lulls you to sleep looking at it. So I'm not terribly impressed with the designs here. And so when it comes to great story and art, I don't think we've seen any evidence of that. I don't think we've seen any evidence that any of these promises are really reasons to support the Rippaverse, especially when you take into account the high cost. We're looking at a base cost for these comics of $35 for a 96-page comic. Now, let me try and put that in perspective. A standard 22, 24-page comic off the rack costs about $5. 96 is about 24 times 4, so you would think that one of these comics might run you around 20 bucks, but you've got 35 bucks instead. Well, some of that's going to be coming from the fact that a lot of this is being run not with distributors, not with publishers, not with the major companies who are doing all the heavy lifting of distributing your book for you. And so there's a lot that gets packed into the $35 price. But at the same time, you're not even talking about tax and shipping and handling at that point. I mean, this is not coming free through Amazon Prime, and this is not coming to you tax free. You're having to pay $38 when it comes to taxes and $48 when it comes to the shipping price. I mean, my God, you're talking about practically a $50 investment into this comic just for promises that have turned out so far to be empty just on the basis of the time schedule. And you don't have any guarantees of quality of writing that would go with the art to make it something that is something more than the sum of its parts. So what then is driving people to buy so many of these comics that he's got $3.2 million and 37,000 backers? Well, I think I can sum it up in one picture. This is from 2012. This is before the Obergefell v. Hodges decision that legalized gay marriage in all 50 states, and there was still controversy going back and forth. One of the controversies involved the restaurant Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A was run by a Christian family, the Cathys, who had donated a lot of money to conservative causes that were anti gay marriage. And as a result of that, there were a lot of people who were boycotting Chick fil A, who were basically saying, don't buy Chick fil A product because they are against gay marriage. Now, on the conservative side, however, that spurred an opposite reaction. That spurred the equal and opposite effect that Newton's law of third law of thermodynamics pretty much guarantees, which is you will get the opposite effect the more you push. And so what happened is there was instituted a boycott, which is what it was called at the time, a boycott of Chick-fil-A, where even people who didn't like Chick-fil-A sandwiches, like myself, I'm not really a huge Chick-fil-A fan, I'm more of a Wendy's guy, but even people like me who just supported the cause would go and buy from Chick-fil-A to offset the effect of the Chick-fil-A boycott on the other side. So basically, it was people buying product not because of the product itself, because even to this day, I don't really think Chick fil A really is that much to shout about. But we bought the sandwiches because we supported the cause. And that was the real driving force. It was a boycott. It was not something that was any testimony to the quality of what it was that we were consuming. And when you listen to the Comicsgate people talk back and forth, and there's hours and hours of conversation that you can go back through and look at all of their conversations and see what it is that is driving them, what it is that is driving their readers, you will get agreement in portions of this from them directly from the horse's mouth. For example, I mentioned the godfather of Comicsgate, Ethan Van Sciver, who does the comic book series Cyberfrog, and I say series loosely because there's been exactly one book published, and the second book is getting published finally this year. If the comic book industry were not provably, visibly, obviously corrupted by radical left wing politics, then there would be no reason for anybody to counter it with opposition. Clearly, there is something that is turning off at least the 30,000 plus readers who are backing Eric July so far, sight unseen, since they've only seen a few pages of ISOM. And basically, this all agrees with what I'm saying here. First of all, that this is opposition. Now, to be fair, they're not talking about trying to hurt Marvel and DC by making them less successful. They're just basically saying that this is them trying to show that they can create good comics apart from the Marvel and DC architecture, the current architecture in which you're publishing a comic every month, and in which maybe it's saturated with all of these left-wing politics. You don't have to do it that way. You could produce good, solid volumes just on your own without them, and that their readers are buying in large part because, but their readers are buying in large part because they want to see this kind of competition. They want to see this succeed. They don't want all of the actions and drama that have been brought to these creators' way, by the way, by people working for the big two, by the social justice warriors who are working within the comic book industry. They don't want to see those people win. And so this is their way. This is their fans' way of punching back at the people who are punching down at them. And the proof to me in the pudding is how it's sight unseen. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I had a different idea of where I was going to go with my discussion. That it's sight unseen. We haven't seen much of anything except a couple of interior pages and a cover. And how is that really supposed to be worth the $50? Well, it's worth the $50 if you understand that what they're doing is they're trying to punch back. And this, by the way, this Chick-fil-A bag was left in the parking garage on top of this trash can at my office. You know, this was a symbol that was left at my office where people who had eaten at Chick-fil-A, I didn't leave this bag there, by the way, people who had eaten at Chick-fil-A basically put it on there to basically show everyone who had was coming back from lunch that somebody had eaten from Chick-fil-A that day. And I'm taking the position that everybody who is buying one of these ISOM comics is doing so that they can show, hey, look, I ate at Chick-fil-A today. I bought something that was independent and crowdfunded and conservative, and it is not subscribing to the big two model or to the big two politics. And by the way, I went later on. I went and I took this bag and I just threw it in the trash because I thought, you know what, we really need to not have politics in the workplace. So you've got all these people who are paying $50 to basically do I hate to put it in these terms, but it's what it is. They're doing a virtue signal. They're doing a punch up at the people who they think are trying to punch down at them. And let's just have the customer reviews tell the story. These are a couple of customer reviews from the ISOM campaign. One guy says, as a specialty comic book seller, we support the efforts to better the industry. Currently, comics are stale and just plain gross. We thank you from WisconsinComics.com. And then another person from the Netherlands says, I would have bought this if it was drawn and written by a 6-year-old Eric just to support the cause of getting this woke crap out of comics. Now, he does say this looks really good, but he's basically saying it's not the quality that matters. It's not the quality that matters at all. What matters is the ability to punch Nazis. and here is the really interesting thing about Comicsgate in general, is because Comicsgate tries to present itself as like me taking the Chick-fil-A bag and pushing it in the trash. Because my feeling was that, look, we need to get the politics out of the workplace, and Comicsgate is presenting itself as we need to get the politics out of comics. But if you look back just to pictures like this is Captain America, a symbol of America, punching out the symbol of Nazism. Politics have been part of comic books for a long, long time. In fact, one of the most successful and well-known runs of comics came into being because they paired the conservative Green Lantern with the liberal Green Arrow and showed their contrast and conflict as they fought crime, as they handled various menaces. So it was that political dynamic that actually spurred this comic to greater heights. Likewise, the whole Marvel universe became a political brawl when it came down to Civil War. There was so much politics wrapped up into this. How much government supervision do superheroes really need? Should superheroes be forced to reveal their identity to the government and register with the government and be trained by the government in order to fight the good fight? Well, Civil War inevitably ended in victory for the Iron Man side, and in Avengers: The Initiative, you wound up with superhero teams formed in all 50 states, and all of these superheroes' identities were known to Iron Man, It's because he was the director of the whole thing. But then you had Dark Reign, in which the mantle of head of the initiative was passed over to Spider-Man's greatest enemy, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, who had managed to fool everybody into thinking he was heroic now. And so you've got, and by the way, I don't think the orange coloring here was a foreshadowing of Donald Trump, although that would have been kind of genius if somebody actually saw into the future and and was trying to make a metaphor for Trump. But it's the idea of putting so much power in government hands that it falls into the wrong hands. The entire Marvel universe became a political metaphor, became almost a meme of politics in general. And it's not just, and people do this on a more personal level too. You've got John Semper saying that Cyborg Rebirth will address Vic Stone's life as a black man living in Detroit. Now, of course, far be it for me to think that a book about Cyborg might actually be a book about cybernetics and how a cyborg actually fights crime and does stuff like that. I was not expecting it to be about a black man living in Detroit. I would expect a title called Detroit Man to be like that. But again, I'm just showing that there is a strong inclination to insert things that are important to oneself into comic books. And if things that are important to oneself is politics, is social commentary, then that's what's going to get into the books, and that's also going to be what makes the books more real. And I would suspect that Eric July probably has plans to do the same thing, because if you look on his wall, you've got a picture of Thomas Sowell, one of the famous black conservatives in America, and it would surprise me if you didn't have at least some political contribution from that. I know that, when I was thinking about, hey, if I were writing Miles Morales, the character who I know really nothing about, and I hope to investigate more about in the near future, if I were writing about Miles Morales, wouldn't it be interesting to introduce him to like a college professor or something who knew a lot about, or was an archetype of Thomas Sowell, and so he could kind of shape Miles Morales's mind and thinking, or at least kind of give him some idea of what it's like to be a black conservative and stuff. That's something that I thought about. So it's very, very easy when you think about the things that are important to you and how you want to put some of that on the page, that you can see how politics very easily gets into comics. And it's not like Ethan Van Sciver hasn't done the same bloody thing. Because in his Cyberfrog 1998, The Diary of Heather Swain, which is a bridge between the first Cyberfrog book, Blood Honey, and then the second Cyberfrog book, Wrecked Planet, which will be published in the near future, you had a reference to a 1998 event where at the Grammys, a Bob Dylan was playing, and all of a sudden, this freaking wacko, this absolute wackadoo with soy bomb painted on his chest, gets up on stage, and for 30 full seconds, he's allowed to just be dancing and gyrating next to Bob Dylan. And Ethan Van Sciver actually went and incorporated that into his Cyberfrog 1998, saying that this was the triggering moment for the alien invasion of the Vespas, who is the murder hornet type alien life form, to come on down. Because basically what this proved is that America, or the people of Earth, had lost their fight, had lost all their masculinity, and basically lost the ability to just basically take this guy and beat his ass and say, no, we're not going to put up with your stupid gyrations up here until, Bob Dylan should have like swung his guitar. Now, that's basically taking something and making it a social political commentary in your comic book. So how is that not the same thing that other people have done in the past, where they've made their politics more explicit and more part of the story itself? So to me, Comicsgate is not just about keeping things neutral. It's about putting that bag up on the trash can saying, ha ha, we have our politics too, and you can't shut us out just because we have our politics. You want to punch us, we want to punch you just the same. And my argument is that every $50 purchase of ISOM is a punch in that general direction. So, all that being said, is any of that really wrong, though? I mean, I don't mind the fact that people are punching up and buying and using their dollars to make statements and saying, we don't like where comic books are going today. But I would like at least the honesty to say that's what it is. It's a statement about not necessarily the quality of the Comicsgate books, because who's to say that even matters? There are people who explicitly said it doesn't. It's more about basically saying, hey, I am doing what I can to support a movement against the kind of liberal nonsense in comic books that I don't like, even though it may be a little bit about pissing in the wind. One thing I would like to suggest for all the Comicsgate people out there is if you really want to build a universe, you need to get together, because Comicsgate would be probably fantastic as a comics universe. Now, I know that all of the Comicsgate creators are largely interested in their own personal properties and don't want to take time to deviate away from that. I know Ethan Van Sciver's got another Cyberfrog book in him. You've got Shane Davis has, what was it, Starlight Cats and Inglorious Rex. Those are a couple of titles of his. Do you actually want to take the time away from your pet properties, from the things that give you the most pleasure, and actually work toward building an actual comic book universe alongside your fellow Comicsgate creators? If you really want to change the industry, I think that's what you'll do. I think what you want to do is, even if you're winding up putting out high-priced materials, same as campaigns like this, you really want to gather together in strength. You've got a lot of great writers, you've got a lot of great artists, you've got a lot of good talent out there, but use those talents together to build a comic book universe that can come out in a very much more timely fashion. And I'm talking about monthly output from this Comicsgate universe, even if it's monthly output coming from different authors. If you had 12 crowdfunded comics coming out in the same comic book universe, and those are coming out every single month, because you had this massive gathering of all these different crowdfunding creators working together to put all this out, you could create something insanely good. Insanely good. But individually, it really is a what is it? If we don't stand together, then we'll all hang separately. And by hang separately, in this case, it means be wildly successful separately. But will you really change the industry, though? I don't know that you'll do that. I don't know if that's the kind of change you're actually going to make. So those have been my thoughts on Rippaverse and the secrets of Comicsgate. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and please do subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my playlist, The Creeping Rainbow in Comics, if you want to take a look at how LGBTQ themes have been introduced into comics over the past few decades. And other than that, I think that's all I got to say. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you later.